Component-based development for the web is huge fun, and in many ways it has changed the way that we think about how we build for the web. But change isn't always fun. Change brings about new challenges, which, without proper guidance, can introduce new pains and frustrations into workflows. So in today's lesson, we're going to build a to-do list project, using React, of course. Welcome back to your professional diploma in React JavaScript. This is lesson 8, building an application, a to-do list. And for lesson 7's challenge, you were tasked to create a new React project using create React app. Then use a higher order component that takes any component and returns a new one. As you know, a higher order component or an HOC takes a component as an input parameter and returns a new component. So after you create your HOC, you can create any new component using a formula like this. And in this lesson, we're going to unpack the project structure and scaffolding, and we'll build a to-do list application using React and JSX. And did you know that building a to-do list application is probably the most popular first step into the world of React, as it solidifies some of the basic principles of the library? How to structure large React apps into folders and files is a highly opinionated topic. Basically, there is no right way to do it, and there's no wrong way to do it. Let's dive in and see why we say that. Most React projects start with an src folder, and one src app.js file with an app component. At least that's what you get when you're using create React app. The app function component renders something like this. Eventually, this component adds more features. It naturally grows in size and needs to extract parts of it as standalone React components, like this. Here, we're extracting a React list component and another child component from the app component. And it's fine to have multiple components in one file. It's even fine in a larger React application, whenever one's component is strictly tied to another one. However, in this scenario, eventually your one file will not be sufficient enough for your React project. That's when we transition into step 2, having multiple React files. And this step follows the rule, multiple files rule them all. Take for instance our previous app component with its list and list item components. Rather than having everything in one src app.js file, we can split these components up into multiple files. And you can decide how far you want to take it here. For example, you could go with the following folder structure. While the src list.js file would have the implementation details of the list and the list item components, it would only export the list components from the file as public API, as shown here. There are many pain points associated with deep directory nesting in JavaScript projects. When one programming construct is included within another, it becomes harder to write relative imports between them, or to update those imports when the files are moved. Unless you have a very compelling reason to use a deep folder structure, consider limiting yourself to a maximum of 3 or 4 nested folders within a single project. And of course, this is only a recommendation, and it may not be relevant to your specific project. If you're just starting a project, don't spend more than 5 minutes on choosing a file structure. Pick any of the approaches, or come up with your own, and start writing code. It's as easy as that. You'll likely want to rethink it anyway after you've written some real code. If you're feeling completely stuck, start by keeping all the files in a single folder. Eventually, it will grow large enough that you will want to separate some files from the rest. By that time, you'll have enough knowledge to tell which files you edit together most often. In general, it's a good idea to keep files that often change together close to each other. As projects grow larger, they often use a mixture of both of the above approaches in practice, so choosing the right one in the beginning isn't extremely important. And it's time for action. We're going to dive into our project, and you'll see that component-based development for the web is a lot of fun. In this demo, we're going to use the Create React app to get the React boilerplate provided by Facebook. We'll build a simple to-do list application using the concepts we've learned so far. 3, 2, 1, let's hop in. Okay, so now we're going to use Create React App to build a to-do list project. So I'm going to open up our folder examples, which are in desktop, and then I would use React.js folder. And then I would select this folder. And now I would build a new project using new terminal over here. And here I will write npx create react app. npx create react app to-do list. And then hit enter as always. It takes a little bit of time. Give it a second. Okay, now it's done. So our to-do list project is created. So now let's change the directory to our project. So cd, if you can see over here in the React.js folder, I have our two properties, the blog, my app, and then to-do list is just created. So I will change the directory to-do list. And then I would use npm start. And then this should open a server or a local server that's showing the default of our Create React app. Great, so now everything's working perfectly. So I'll go back and open my to-do list project, and then go to src folder. And then inside this, in the app.js, I will delete everything inside this div. And then I will just render hello React. And then I'll save the file, and then I don't need the logo. Save the file and check. There you go, it's working. So now we can go to our source folder to create a new folder called components. And inside this components folder, I will create our first component, which is going to be form to-do.js. And then hit enter. So now I would create a class component, import React component from React. And then export default class form to do extends component. And then I'll call the render method, and then open curly brackets, and then here I will return the following div. And then inside that div, I need the user to insert a new text, right? So I will write input, just one input. And then I'll close the tag over here. And then the type is going to be text. Then close the text here and remove this space, and then after that I need a button. So I'm going to write add task. And then I'll save this form to do.js. So here I just created an input field with a button for adding to-do task inside a class component. Alright, so the next step is setting up event handlers. Now we need to add event handlers for tracking the user entered value in input field, and also listen for onClick event on button. So here, let's first initialize our state. So before the render method, I will type state. And then let's add some comments to explain what's going on here. So I will initialize the state. So that's going to be state equal to input value. So state equal input value. And you can type any name of your choice, and then I would pass an empty string. Now let's add a placeholder so that the user will know exactly what they have to do when they see the input. So placeholder equal enter task. And then, enter task. Then save the file. And now we will bind the input field with the state. So over here, let's divide this multiple line. So then I would put value equal this dot state dot input value. Dot input value. There we go. Just before this, we can add a comment to explain this state. So here, bind the input field with the state. And then save the file. And now we can move on to the next step. So here we will store to-dos in array. So to create this array, we will put to-do or to-dos, and then pass an empty array. Now using onClick event in button, we will add the input value that we stored in state to the to-dos array. So what we can do is we can define our button submit or submit handler. Once again, you can name it anything you'd like. Equal. And then after equal, we will receive an event. So we'll just call it E. And then return this dot set state. And then our to-do or our to-dos array. So it's going to be an array. This.state.inputValue. And then save the file. Now we've changed the state with setState and added the input value to the to-dos array. So now we will print this out in an ordered list as an array. So to do that, we will use the map method to loop over each to-do in to-dos array. So in the JSX area, I will add ordered list. And then here I will render this.state.todos. Then I'll use map method. And then inside the map, this will receive to do. And then for each to do, I will return li off to do. Li off to do. And then save this. Now let's go to our app.js and import this form to do. And instead of just rendering hello React, then in this div, I will just delete hello React, and then I will return this component form to do. Which is over here. Visual Studio Code will import this automatically for us. So when I press enter, then import to-do form from this location, now I'll close our component and then I'll save the file. So here we have an error in form to-do.js and it says component is not defined. All right, so let's go to form to-do.js and see line 3 over here. And form to do, which is over here, it's component, not components. Okay. Let me show you. There we go. It's component, not components. And then I'll save the file and then I'll go back and check our browser. And here we have our text area and our button. So now if we check and we write anything to do, like wake up, for instance, and then press add task button. Okay, so I'm getting nothing. Okay, so now we need to handle the onClick event. So when we click on this button, it will render this task over here, just below our input area. So the first mistake that we made is we didn't store the previous value of state, which we have to do. So if you take a look over here in the set state, we change the state directly. We used this.state.inputValue, and instead of this, we have to use spread operator. And here we can just add to this the spread operator, and then this.state.todos. And then also change the input value. So the input value I will just leave as an empty string. So here, this will clear the field once item is added. So let's add a comment. So you can remember this step. This will clear the input field once item is added. And now save the file. And here we are copying the previous items into to-dos array using spread operator and placing it at the end of this array where the user enters the value that will be shown first. Alright, so now we've handled the submit button. Let's update the state on input value change. So now we will update the state whenever the user changes value in input field by firing onChange event. So here on the input field, I will add onChange over here, onChange equal this dot input change. This dot input change. And I'll add this input change function to target any change in the input field. So just before the button submit, I will add input change. Or input change handler, if you want to name it like that. And this will receive an event, and then this event will then return this dot set state, and then input value equal this event dot target dot value. Input value equal this event dot target dot value. Then save the file. And now whenever the user enters any value in the input text area, this method will change the value of the state of the input value to the value that the user has entered. Now let's add this button, Submit Event Handler, to the button. So I'll come down to the button and then we will define onClick equal this dot button submit. This dot button submit. And then I'll save the file. And now let's go back to the browser and then enter our tasks. So the first task was wake up. And then press on add task. And as you can see, it just added as an ordered list here. We find one, and then the second one, eat breakfast. Add task. There we go. So it goes on and on, whatever type of task you want. It's automatically added to our ordered list in the screen. So that's why we add or we render list using a form in React. All right, so now let's open up our developer tool and then open up our console. Okay, so we find a warning and it says each child in a list should have a unique key. So let's clear this. Even though it's showing up as an error in the console, it won't stop the execution of our app. But as a developer, we should be able to deliver maximum efficiency. As the error says, it's expecting some unique value to each to-do item. So we will pass the index of the list item. So in our order list over here, when we render this to do before this, we can add key equal index. And then close this tag. And delete this. So the property will be for the list. So key equal index, then render that to do. So now I will save the file and then let's refresh and let's see if this error disappears. So now when we type our to do, like waking up, and then add task, there is no error that shows that message. Okay, so now we're going to add a minor enhancement to our to-do application. We will add validation on button click. If the input field is empty, and if yes, then don't add the empty string to the to-do list. So if you can see over here, when you press on the add task without entering any text, it will add a lot of tasks together as an empty string. But how do we stop this? Well, we do that by adding an if statement to our button submit. Let me show you. So over here, we can write if this.state.input value if it's not equal to an empty string, then do the following. And then close the curly brackets like this. Now I'm going to save the file, and if we go back to our task and then refresh over here, and if you press on add task, it won't add as a new empty string task for you. So now it just accepts a string, like eat breakfast. Add task, so now it's adding our task. If you add or if you press more times, it won't add anything for you. And now, as a feature in our to-do application as the user, I can read a list of tasks and I can add a new task. So let's just wrap up the steps involved in building our to-do list application. So first, we set up the React with create React app, right? And then we create our UI of the to-do app. And I call it form to do. And then I set up an event handler, which is input change. And then the other one is button submit. And then after that, we created the initial state. And we updated the state on input value change. So then we added on-click event for the button. So whenever we click the button submit handler will fire. And then after that, we store our to-do an array called to-dos. And then manage it with state. And then we cleared the console errors by using the key index. And we did a minor enhancement to our to-do application by adding an if statement to the button submit handler. And that brings us to the end of this tutorial. I do hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you back in the lesson. All right,